The HOA discovered that I owned several plots of land in the area, so they invaded and built houses for squatters during my vacation. I had owned multiple plots of land for years, never hiding it but not advertising it either. Everyone knew I worked with real estate, but no one cared until envious neighbors started questioning how I maintained my house, changed cars from time to time, and still traveled. And when I went on a 1-month trip, they made a decision that pushed me over the edge. I've lived here for years. I know every street, every lot, every change. I never flaunted anything, but I also didn't hide my work. I invested in land, buying, selling, and holding on to some properties. People who knew me were aware. I was discreet, but eventually some neighbors started noticing my life improving. It wasn't extravagant. My house was well kept, and I changed cars every few years, always picking something nice, but never excessive. But for some people, anyone who has a little more becomes a target for gossip. The whispers began. First, curiosity. How does he have so much money? What does he even do? Then suspicion. Why does he own so much land? He must be hiding something. And finally, pure envy. It's not fair. He has more than he should. I ignored it. I knew it happened to anyone who got ahead in life. But things really escalated when the HOA got involved. This HOA always existed, but it never had much power. It was just a bunch of nosy neighbors acting like they controlled everything. At first, it was just complaints about trash cans and potholes. But over time, they started acting like they owned the neighborhood. They held meetings to decide what was best for the community, but in reality, it was just a group of busybodies trying to control whatever they could. And when they realized I owned multiple plots of land, they decided that was a problem. Then came my trip. After years of hard work, I took a long overdue vacation, a trip around the world. I told only a few trusted people, locked up my house, set everything in order, and left. It never crossed my mind that I should worry. My land was legally owned, fully paid for, and properly maintained. But when I came back, I almost passed out. Driving home, I passed one of my properties and froze. Where there used to be an empty, well-kept lot, there are now houses. Yes, houses, not makeshift shacks, actual, small, but organized homes. My heart raced. I thought I was in the wrong place. But no, it was my land. I rushed home, trying to understand what the hell had happened. That's when neighbors showed up, wearing a smug grin, clearly enjoying the moment. Oh, you're back. Yeah, the HOA decided to put those abandoned lots to better use. Abandoned? I paid for everything on time, kept it clean, never left it neglected. But in their minds, since I wasn't building anything, they had the right to decide what to do with my property. They organized a community project to help those in need. On MY land, without informing me, without my permission. And it wasn't just one plot. I checked my other properties and found more houses. Some are makeshift, others clearly built with outside funding. Turns out, some companies even donated materials, thinking it was a legitimate project. I was speechless. How can people just decide that private property now belongs to someone else? How does an HOA have the power to do this? And the worst part? When I confronted them, they acted like I was the villain, like I was greedy for not helping the community. I knew I had to fight ahead, but I had no idea what was coming next. I knew reclaiming my land wouldn't be easy, but I had no idea just how absurd things were about to get. After discovering that the HOA had simply taken my land and built houses for squatters, my first reaction was to try and resolve things as rationally as possible. I gathered all my documents, went to the HOA's office, and asked for an explanation. But the response I got was pure mockery. Oh, you're back? Yeah, we decided those lots were being wasted, so we helped the community. What do you mean we decided? I was the owner. I had the deed. I paid the taxes. Everything was legally mine. And yet, they spoke to me as if I had no rights over my own property. I tried to stay calm. I showed my documents, explained that the land was mine, and that this was an illegal invasion. What response did I get? But you weren't even using it. While you were off traveling, these families had nowhere to live. Do you really want to just evict these people? I froze. How do you even respond to something like that? They had twisted the situation so much that now I was the villain. To any outsider, I must have looked like some heartless millionaire trying to kick poor families out of their homes. But I wasn't going to accept that. I tried negotiating. I asked who had taken over the land, try to see if there was any solution that wouldn't escalate the situation further. But every time I attempted to find common ground, they just doubled down. They told me I didn't need all that land, that the city needed more affordable housing, and that my land was now serving a greater purpose. That's when I realized they had no intention of solving this peacefully. As far as they were concerned, the decision had already been made. So I took the issue to City Hall. And that's when I found out that the HOA had already been working behind the scenes long before I even got back. They had started a petition to have my land classified as a social interest zone. Essentially, they were trying to get the city to officially approve what they had already done illegally. And worse, they were spreading the narrative that I was a greedy speculator, a guy who bought land just to leave it empty while the community suffered. Articles started appearing in small local newspapers. Social media posts painted the HOA as heroes fighting against a land baron. They talked about me as if I were some faceless billionaire hoarding half the city, not a local resident who had lived there for years and worked for every cent I had. And then came the protests. At first, it was just a few signs near my lot saying housing for all and land belongs to the people. But things escalated fast. One day, as I left my house, I saw a group of people on my street holding signs, chanting about how I wanted to evict families. Some of them were longtime neighbors, people who had greeted me with smiles just months before. But now, they were looking at me like I was their enemy. I tried to reason with them. I tried explaining how absurd this was. But it didn't matter what I said. They had already decided I was the villain. Social media exploded with attacks. My name was plastered in neighborhood groups, accusing me of suing hardworking families. Some posts suggested I was a land hoarder, buying up property just to let it sit empty and make a profit later. It was insane. And then I received a not-so-subtle threat. A note was left on my gate. It read, "Be careful who you're messing with. This isn't just about land." At that moment, I realized this wouldn't be solved with words alone. If I wanted to take back what was mine, I was going to have to fight for it. The threat in the note wouldn't leave my mind. Be careful who you're messing with. This isn't just about land. As angry as I was, until that moment, I thought I was just dealing with a group of nosy neighbors, driven by a false sense of justice and a bit of jealousy. But that message had a different tone. This wasn't just a land dispute or a protest from people wanting housing. It was a warning. At first, I tried to ignore it. I thought it might just be someone trying to scare me. But something didn't sit right. If this was just about housing, why was I being threatened? Why had they done all of this while I was away? And more importantly, why were they pushing so hard to make their land grab official so quickly? Something didn't add up. So, I decided to investigate. I started asking discreet questions to a few people in the neighborhood, longtime residents who weren't involved in the chaos. That's when I heard the first strange rumors. Many of the new residents in these so-called community houses weren't exactly homeless families, as the HOA wanted everyone to believe. Some were relatives and friends of the HOA members themselves. Others had moved in from different parts of the city, lured by the promise of affordable rent. Rent? That immediately set off alarm bells. I kept digging and found out that, despite the public narrative of housing for those in need, the reality was something else entirely. The HOA hadn't simply given the houses to people. They were charging symbolic rent to those living there. So that was it. This wasn't about affordable housing. This wasn't about social justice. This was about money. The HOA had taken my land and was making a profit off of it. They had set up a system where they controlled who could live there, and in exchange, they collected monthly payments. The rent varied depending on the size of the lot and its location. Some people were paying a considerable amount just to have a place there. And that wasn't all. Some of the houses were being sold. Yes, sold. People were paying to buy a piece of my land without any legal documents, no official ownership, just a verbal agreement or, at best, some fake contract made up by the HOA. That explained everything. The speed at which they took over the land. The HOA's excessive support. The petition to legitimize everything. The threats. I wasn't dealing with a group of well-meaning neighbors trying to improve the community. I was dealing with an organized scheme to make money off my property. Now I understood why they were so determined to make me the villain. To them, I was an obstacle. But if they thought I was going to let this slide, they were dead wrong. The first thing I did was gather evidence. I spoke to some of the people living on my land, and without knowing any better, they told me they were paying rent to an HOA administrator. Some even showed me handwritten receipts. I took photos of everything. I recorded conversations. Then, I went straight to City Hall. I presented my documents, explained what was happening, and made it clear that I was taking legal action to get my land back. At first, some city officials tried to downplay the situation, saying I should try to reach an agreement with the HOA. But when I showed them proof that money was being collected illegally, everything changed. This was serious. An illegal occupation was one thing, but an organization charging rent on land they didn't own, that was a whole other level. I filed a lawsuit immediately. This wasn't just about reclaiming my land anymore. Now, it was a matter of principle. They had tried to push me aside, thinking I would just accept it, thinking I wouldn't have the guts to stand up against the power of the community. But what they didn't expect was that I had something they didn't, the legal right to that land. And I was going to fight for every single square inch of it. When I filed the lawsuit to reclaim my land, I knew it wouldn't be easy. But I had everything on my side: the law, the documents, the purchase records, and the proof that the HOA was illegally charging rent. There was no way I could lose. What I didn't expect was that even after winning the case, the battle was far from over. Since this fight began, I had been painted as the villain. Social media was flooded with comments against me. People who knew nothing about the real situation were calling me greedy, a speculator, a selfish man hoarding land while people starved. They said I didn't need all that land, that I was against the community. And the worst part, many openly claimed that the only reason I was able to buy so much land was because I got lucky or must have done something shady. Oh, so now only he can own land? Why can he buy everything and we can't? This guy thinks he owns the whole town. No one talked about the years I spent working for it, the sacrifices I made, the choices, the risks I took to invest. To them, I only had land because I was privileged. But the hardest blow came when I realized that even City Hall wasn't interested in fixing the situation. The lawsuit moved quickly. When I presented my evidence, the judge had no choice but to rule in my favor. The decision was clear. My land was being occupied illegally. I had full ownership rights, and the HOA had to immediately stop any financial activities related to it. I won. But then the real problem began. Even with a court order on my side, City Hall refused to do anything to remove the people from my land. The excuse was always the same. It's a delicate situation. We need to avoid conflict. We're analyzing the best solutions. But it was obvious what was really going on. It was election season. The mayor and city council didn't want to get involved in something that could hurt them politically. After all, with the way the story was being told, I was the greedy man trying to evict poor, helpless families. They knew that if they sent the police to remove the squatters, it would be used against them. And who was paying the price? Me. I went straight to City Hall demanding answers. You need to enforce the court's decision. My land is being illegally occupied. The housing secretary looked at me with the most cynical expression I had ever seen. We understand your frustration, sir, but we're dealing with a humanitarian issue. These are families who need a place to live. We're trying to find a peaceful solution. A peaceful solution? They were stalling, waiting for me to give up. I walked out of there furious. I called my lawyer, demanded that he put pressure on City Hall, file another lawsuit, if necessary. But he was blunt with me. You won in court, but you can't force the city to act. The only thing we can do is file more cases and try to get a direct eviction order. But that could take time. I felt a rage I had never felt before. They were just ignoring the fact that they had stolen what was mine. It didn't matter that I did everything legally, that I bought the land fair and square, paid my taxes, kept everything in order. Now, I was just some rich guy trying to take homes away from the poor. But I wasn't giving up. If City Hall refused to act, then I would find another way to fix this. And I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. If City Hall refused to act, then I was going to handle the situation myself. After weeks of stalling, protests against me, and politicians trying to score points off my loss, I realized that no one was actually interested in doing the right thing. They just wanted to push the problem forward until I got tired and gave up. But I wasn't going to give up. The squatters were living on what was mine, enjoying something I had built and fought to achieve. They used the excuse of need, but deep down, many of them weren't even truly in need. They had jobs, they had income, but they were living for free because someone gave them that opportunity. I spent sleepless nights thinking about how to fix this. Going through the courts would take time, and I was sick of hearing my name dragged through the mud like I was a criminal. I needed a practical solution. Then a thought crossed my mind. How exactly are they getting electricity and water? I went looking for answers. The next day, I went to the power company and requested a report on my properties. I presented my ownership documents and asked if there were any active accounts under my name or any newly registered connections. After some waiting, the clerk returned with a concerned look. "Sir, we found several electricity connections on your properties. Some are still registered under your name, while others were recently set up with contracts that don't seem to have gone through a normal approval process. So they were using my electricity." I took a deep breath to keep from exploding right there. I stayed calm and asked what could be done. The clerk explained that since the properties were still legally mine and the bills were being issued under my name, I had full authority to request an immediate disconnection. Then disconnected. Now, she hesitated. "But sir, there are people living there." I replied coldly. "People who are illegally occupying my property. I'm not responsible for them. If they have a problem, they can take it to court." She swallowed hard and started the process. The disconnection was scheduled for the coming days. But I didn't stop there. I left the power company and went straight to the water supplier. I made the same request, presented my documents, and demanded a report on the connections. To my surprise, the situation was even worse. Some water connections had been set up without proper documentation, while others were completely illegal, tapped directly into the public water supply. Again, the clerk tried to argue, saying that cutting the water could cause a social issue. But I wasn't interested in social issues at that moment. If the city wants to solve the problem, they can find another solution. But I'm not responsible for providing water to squatters. After a long discussion, my request was approved and the shutdown order was sent. Now, all I had to do was wait. For the first few days after the power was cut, the squatters tried to resist. Some homes had generators. Others illegally tapped into nearby power lines. But when the water was shut off, the situation started to change. At first, I heard complaints. People saying I was inhumane, that I was taking water away from families. Some even went to the HOA, demanding a solution. But the truth was, they were on their own now. The HOA, which had been so vocal and full of speeches about social justice, suddenly disappeared. They knew they had lost. They knew they had no way to fight back anymore. After a week without water or electricity, some families started leaving. At first, there was still some resistance. Some tried carrying buckets to get water from elsewhere. Others asked friends or relatives for shelter. But as the days passed, it became unsustainable. 2 weeks later, the first makeshift homes began to be taken down. Some squatters simply packed up what they could and left. Others tried to hold out, but without water and electricity, it was no longer a place they could stay. Slowly, the houses started emptying. And then, one night, I got a message from one of the few neighbors who still spoke to me. "Your land is empty again. They're gone." The next day, I went to check. Where there had once been people living, now there were only abandoned structures, broken furniture, and scattered trash. But the squatters were gone. I had finally gotten my land back. When I finally reclaimed my land, I thought the nightmare was over. But I had underestimated the shamelessness of the HOA. They didn't accept defeat, and instead of simply moving on with their lives, they started spreading even more lies about me. This time it was worse. They weren't just calling me greedy or labeling me a speculator anymore. Now, they were openly attacking me. They claimed I was a monster for evicting innocent families. They started a petition to try and stop me from continuing to harm the community. Some even tried to convince City Hall to prevent me from building anything on my own land. But the truth was, they were furious because they had lost their gold mine. Without the land they had stolen from me, the HOA lost its influence and, most importantly, its source of income. That illegal rent collection they had been running was cut off at the root, and they knew they would never be able to pull off the same scam in the area again. But the game wasn't over yet. I was far from satisfied. They had used my name to illegally set up electricity for the squatters. They had profited off my land for over a year, and now they were trying to paint me as the villain, when in reality, they were the criminals. So, I filed another lawsuit. This time, I was coming for everything they owed me. First, I demanded compensation for the fraudulent use of my name to register the electricity accounts. This wasn't just a clerical mistake, it was outright fraud. I presented all the documents proving that I had never authorized any electrical connections for those homes and that, technically, they had been using my account to cover the electricity supply. Then I demanded back rent. After all, those homes were built on my land, and if they had been occupying it without my permission, that meant they owed me rent. Not just for the duration of the lawsuit, but from the very beginning of the illegal occupation, including the full year I had spent traveling around the world and the additional months fighting in court. And finally, the part that sent the HOA into a complete meltdown. The houses built on my land were now legally mine. That's right, by law. Any structure built on private property belongs to the landowner. Since no one had legal documents proving they had built there with official permission, I was granted full ownership of those houses without paying a dime. The HOA president nearly had a heart attack when he found out. They tried everything to fight the ruling. They argued that I couldn't just steal the community's homes. They claimed that the families deserved some kind of compensation, as if I had asked them to build there in the first place. But the court was clear. The land was mine, and everything on it was mine too. And then came the final blow. The combined fines and back rent added up to a massive sum. The HOA had no way to pay everything. So the one who ended up taking the biggest financial hit was none other than its leader. And I saw an opportunity for a final move. I bought his house. It was a large home in one of the best parts of the neighborhood, and he obviously did not want to sell. But with a massive debt hanging over him, he had no choice. I made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Not because it was a great deal for him, but because it was his only way to avoid total financial ruin. When he signed the papers, the hatred in his eyes was priceless. And then I made sure to kick him out of the neighborhood. He was forced to leave in humiliation. No influence, no power, no home. The HOA lost all the control it once had, and they never dared mess with me again. In the end, I didn't just get my land back. I made a profit, and I learned a valuable lesson. Those who try to steal from others always pay the price in the end.